So if you've been, engaging with any global news at all lately, you can feel it, right?
Yeah.
There's this atmosphere. It's thick with a very specific kind of anxiety. We're seeing all these intense pressures at once.
Things like the stress on global supply chains, for sure.
Exactly that. And then economic instability, military tensions in places, like Taiwan. And it just results in this constant parade of worst case scenarios in the headlines.
It is an undeniable reality that there's tension out there,
Yeah.
but I think the core question we need to be asking ourselves is a little different.
Okay.
What if that profound, almost paralyzing sense of fear you're feeling isn't just a simple one-to-one reaction to the facts? What if that fear is being systematically amplified by the very structure of how we get information?
And that's exactly what we're going to deep dive into today. We're using a really fascinating framework called the Fear-to-Topology Model, or FTM.
Right.
And this framework, it's not about, it doesn't tell you to stop worrying or pretend that geopolitical tension just doesn't exist. It's more like a tool.
It's designed to give you a thinking operating system, a cognitive tool, really, to analyze the underlying, well, the topology of all this global anxiety so you can read the world more calmly.
Convert the fear into structure.
That's it, exactly. FTM helps you convert that raw, just overwhelming feeling into an analyzable structure. So our mission today is to break down the central mechanism of FTM.
Which is all about speed.
It's all about how different speeds of reality interact, create these structural gaps, and then amplify emotion. Essentially how high-intensity fear gets manufactured where the danger might still be, limited. We're focusing completely on speed and structural amplification.
Okay, let's get into the FTM basics then, because I think this is such a powerful reframing tool. We're always told to, manage our fear, suppress it.
Right, overcome it, right?
Yeah, but FTM treats fear not as some personal failure or weakness, but as a sensor.
That is the foundational shift. FTM doesn't try to get rid of fear, it tells you to read it. The framework argues that emotion is basically a pressure signal. We call it a gradient.
A gradient.
Yeah. The intensity of that feeling, fear, anger, even really intense hope, it's not noise, it's data.
So if I read a story about, say, a huge shift in regional security policy and my gut clenches, that's not just me being sensitive. That feeling is actually a measurement.
It is.
Yeah.
Your internal sensor has detected high pressure. You've located a heat source somewhere on the world's structure showing you where tension is concentrated.
Okay.
So the FTM approach is, great, you felt the impression. Now let's convert that impression into structure. We need to figure out what structure is supporting that pressure, what's causing it, and maybe most critically, where the boundary of your own knowledge about it is.
It's always structure over impression.
Always.
That right there addresses one of the biggest problems with modern news, just being purely reactive. You feel the anxiety and you just stop thinking clearly. But FTM flips that. The anxiety is just the first piece of information you get.
It stabilizes your observation. If you can read the emotion as a gradient, it forces you to look for the structural cause, instead of just being swept up in the feeling itself. But to analyze that structure, we first have to understand the 3 different speeds at which the world actually moves.
And this is the core of it, right? The NIOS layers. The idea that if you're trying to understand where a geopolitical event is heading, you have to recognize which time scale you're actually listening to.
Because they are almost never synchronized.
Right.
So let's start at the surface, the fastest layer, the one you're interacting with every single hour of the day. Layer 1, the N layer.
The narrative layer.
A narrative layer.
So headlines, social media, sound bites from politicians, instant commentary.
Precisely. Its speed is extreme. Hours, sometimes even minutes. The medium is language, images, media that's optimized completely for your immediate attention and circulation.
And the key thing here is simplicity, right? They have to be simple and feel complete.
Yes, self-contained and easily shareable. This speed optimization means the N layer just inherently favors the definitive, the dramatic, and critically, the worst-case scenario.
I see that so clearly with the supply chain articles. You never see a headline saying, supply chain functioning smoothly, margins are a bit tight.
Not laughing, never.
No, you read, crisis, shelves will be empty tomorrow. That worst-case outcome is just so simple to digest and, more importantly, to share.
It creates its own speed. A narrative of impending doom is structurally easier to build and complete than one of, nuanced stability. The worst case is simple. X collapses into Y. It doesn't need any complicated references to institutions or logistics.
Okay, so let's move down one level. The speed slows down a lot here. We hit layer 2, the I layer.
The interest or intention layer.
The political, strategic layer.
Exactly. Now we're talking about a timescale of months to maybe a few years. The stimuli here are things like political judgments, the drafting of treaties, diplomatic negotiations, budget approvals, all those subtle shifts in alliances.
So this layer is really defined by negotiation. It's where the money and the political capital actually get moved around. But it's still fundamentally about intent, not action yet.
That's right. And because it's about negotiation, the I layer has a core characteristic that really sets it apart from the N layer. It operates with intentional ambiguity.
Ah, okay.
Diplomats, politicians, they rarely make definitive worst-case statements because keeping your options open is the whole game. You don't want to close the door on a future negotiation.
So while the N layer is screaming war or peace, the I layer is focused on sanctions if X happens, or reallocating the budget pending a review.
Precisely. It's all conditional.
Okay, so I've got the fast, simple narrative, the N layer, and the medium speed, ambiguous negotiation, the I layer. Now we anchor ourselves in the deepest, slowest, most stubborn reality.
Layer 3. The OS layer, the operational system.
Or implementation layer.
Yes, and this is the bedrock. This layer moves on a scale of years, decades, sometimes even centuries. The OS is the reality of physical constraints.
Geography, logistics.
Geography, institutional structures, legal frameworks. Think about the sheer volume of military logistics needed for a major operation, or how long it takes to build a new semiconductor plant, or how hard it is to dissolve a 70-year-old trade agreement.
This is the layer that's almost never discussed in the news.
Because it's boring.
It's boring, it's slow, and it resists any kind of immediate change. It's pure inertia.
It is the ultimate speed constraint. If the N layer is talking about a war starting next week, the OS layer is asking, do we physically have the capacity to move that much fuel and material and people across 10,000 miles? Does the legal framework even allow for freezing those assets instantly?
So the OS represents the fundamental conditions for reality.
It really does. It often defines the absolute limits of what is physically and institutionally even possible.
Okay, this framework is fascinating, but I do have a question. Isn't this just a complicated way of saying the media is sensationalist? I mean, we all kind of know that headlines are faster than reality. How is this a new tool?
That is the perfect question, because that's exactly where FTM becomes a specific tool. The issue isn't just the speed difference, it's the structural consequence of that difference. FTM calls it speed shear.
Shear, like tectonic plates moving against each other and creating friction.
Exactly like that. Imagine a really deep, slow-moving river. The riverbed, that's the OS, is barely moving. The main current, the I layer, is flowing steadily.
Okay.
But the foam and the leaves on the surface, that's the N layer, are being blown downstream at maximum speed by the wind. They're running way ahead of the actual mass of the water. That is the structural tension.
So the narrative runs way out ahead while the OS layer is basically static.
That's the shear.
And that structural disconnect, that must be where the anxiety comes from. The future that's being painted by the narrative is fundamentally separated from the future that's, well, structurally viable.
Absolutely. The source material calls this the gap between they talked about future and the possible future, the one that's structurally viable based on the OS constraints. The raw, intense fear you feel is often not a reaction to imminent physical danger, but a reaction to this structural time gap. The narrative has sped away from reality.
Let's use a concrete example, maybe the tensions around Taiwan. The N layer might be circulating, images and commentary saying invasion imminent the next 48 hours.
And that narrative runs at maximum speed. It's simple, it's complete, it's a catastrophic story. But if you shift your focus to the OS layer,
then you have to consider the decades of institutional structures, the immense physical difficulty of an amphibious invasion, the industrial capacity required, the logistics.
all those physical slow-moving constraints, that's the OS. And because that OS reality takes years to change, the N-layer narrative of 48 hours is experiencing maximum speed shear. It's running impossibly fast against a static physical reality.
Which is why the emotion feels so intense. It goes way beyond the current facts of diplomatic talks or military readiness.
The fear is strong because the narrative is fast. That is the core thesis FTM gives us. The fear doesn't necessarily hit you because the situation is maximally dangerous. It hits you because the narrative is maximally fast and shareable.
And that explains why worst-case scenarios always win the attention war. A stable, realistic scenario would require explaining the boring, slow constraints of the OS layer.
Exactly. Explaining why a financial collapse isn't about to happen requires you to detail complex banking regulations, institutional safeguards, infrastructure inertia, all OS features that are slow to explain.
But saying the financial system is dead is 5 words.
It's completed in an instant. Worst-case scenarios have a structural advantage because they can be created and shared entirely within the end layer, completely bypassing the slow, boring reality check of the OS.
So we've gone from just absorbing the anxiety to understanding that the anxiety itself is a data point about a structural distortion.
Hmm.
This invites us, as the observer, to shift our perspective, to stop reacting to the feeling and start analyzing the structure that's supporting it.
Which brings us to the application phase.
Yeah, how do we actually take this framework and convert that emotional pressure signal into genuinely useful information?
When you come across news that triggers that high-intensity gradient, that immediate clench of fear, FTM invites you to just stop, pause, and ask 3 essential analytical questions. These are the tools for measuring the speed share.
Okay, let's break them down. The first question sets the stage.
First, you ask, which layer is this story or argument primarily coming from? N, I, or OS? If it's a clickbait headline or based on an unnamed source claiming imminent disaster, you know you're in the high-speed end layer.
Whereas if it's a detailed report on a new weapons procurement budget, you might be closer to the I or even the OS layer.
Exactly. Identifying the source layer calibrates your speed setting.
Okay, so question 2 then focuses on locating the source of that distortion, the heat we felt.
Second, which layer is moving abnormally fast and creating the shear? If the end layer is screaming, "Crisis now," and demanding immediate action, but the I layer of diplomacy is moving cautiously, and the OS layer logistics, treaties, geography, shows zero movement.
You have high shear.
You have high shear.
Okay.
And you realize the fear you're feeling is a measure of the narrative speed, not necessarily the implementation speed.
And then the third question is the anchor, the reality check. This feels like the most crucial step for getting your clarity back.
It is. Third, which layer, specifically the physical institutional OS, hasn't moved yet? If the crisis narrative requires a major change in logistics or geography or international law, and that OS infrastructure hasn't shifted an inch, then the catastrophic outcome in the end layer is just not structurally viable. Not yet, anyway.
So identifying that static OS constraint, whether it's the lack of deep water ports or a massive legal inertia, that helps you define the limits of the possible future. So by running through these 3 questions, you're basically converting that terrifying uncertainty into an understandable structure. You're measuring the speed difference, the shear, instead of just absorbing the emotional fallout from the fastest information.
It's an act of cognitive self-defense. It allows you to gain the structural clarity you need to keep your own worldview grounded. You move from reacting to the impression to systematically analyzing the structure.
You separate the speed of information from the weight of reality.
That's the goal.
That pretty much wraps up our dive into FTM-02 and this critical role of speed, layers, and shear in amplifying fear. But I guess, while this helps us locate where fear is strongest and why it feels so fast, it doesn't quite tell us how to judge the likelihood of what comes next.
That's absolutely right. Once we understand the structure, the next logical step is to analyze the actual plausibility of potential outcomes. We need tools to assess the range and the weight of different possibilities, to move away from this binary of, 0 or 100% certainty.
And move towards what the framework calls the plausibility gradient.
Exactly. And that's the next stage of structural defense.
That sounds like the ultimate defense against information overload tools, to not just see the anxiety, but to structurally analyze its root cause. So the next time you encounter a headline that triggers maximum fear, ask yourself,
Is this maximum danger? Or is it simply maximum speed? It's a quiet update to your own operating system.
converting panic into analysis. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We'll talk to you next time.